This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The biggest stories of the year tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists. First up, Andrew Douglas, Action News 5. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Jackson Baker from the Memphis Flyer. Thank you for being here. Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for being here. And Les Smith from Fox 13 News. So let's start with pensions. Pensions and city benefits were a huge story all year long, and we'll kind of talk about what happened in the past year and then how that rolls into next year. Bill, the most recent vote by the council is at least seems like the final vote. It seems like what's going to go forward, the new plan.
It's the final vote in a very long year at City Hall on a very technical issue, but it's probably not the end of the issue. What's at play here is that actuaries, experts on the health insurance benefits that city employees get and the pension benefits that city employees and retirees get, had told the administration that the unfunded liability for both of those plans was simply unsustainable for city government without changes in both of those plans. So that's what the debate has been about basically since about the spring at City Hall, changing those plans to make the liability sustainable for city government. And the city council wrapped up the last part of that on the pension plan at City Hall come the end of this year. But we are likely to see, if we haven't already, a lawsuit filed by the municipal unions over the pension plan.
And I should note, as we tape this, it's a little bit before the show's actually aired, so some things may have happened since then. But Jackson, one thing we do know, the fallout, the hostility among the unions to the administration, to many city council members, to Wanda Halbert, who proposed the plan, who had been viewed as an ally of the unions. The fallout isn't over. That's going to continue for some time.
No, in my email basket this week, I discovered there's several people who are bombarding all of us in the media with emails against the mayor and the administration. And her name, Wanda Halbert's name, has been added to the list of going to get you next year.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people have got to make serious adjustments because they're running for re-election next year.
And is the whole council up for re-election next year?
Yes.
Mayor Warden, so all the council.
All council are up for re-election, but in Wanda Halbert's case, and there's also this added talk that some of the council members may have voted for this to feather their own nest, to make sure that they themselves were grandfathered in by the date that they chose to do this. That's got some people talking. The other thing that is also rumored in the mill as well is the possibility there could be another blue flu outbreak as police officers.
This is the unofficial slowdown that happened, in the summer, spring?
Yes, summer, June, July.
Andrew.
Right, so if you look at the public sector, okay, so a lot of the criticism from the public sector is that it's not reflective of the private sector. When you look at the private sector, when they need to make a change, oftentimes it's health care and it's pension or 401k. Here's what the public sector is now doing. They're changing up their health care, they're changing up the pension and the 401k, because what's glaring is that last year when the state comptroller came to town and said, there is a major financial issue, you need to address it, or we could come over and tell you how to run the city. And I think for a lot of those folks at City Hall, that still holds true. And so they know that if they don't make a change now, that the city, or the state rather, is going to come in.
Was going to force down the third. Sure. And the other thing, and we had Wharton on the show recently, but he said it all year long, and the Chamber of Commerce is lobbying heavily for this change, is that you look at other cities, Detroit being the biggest example, that was a big part of how they got in trouble, was funding that they had a lot of problems, but the funding problem part was benefits. New Orleans has, I mean, Illinois, you can go city, state around the country, and these benefits that were set up in the 70s and 80s got on what the governments are saying are an unsustainable trajectory. Wharton also said when he was on the show, there were three things when he meets with bonding agencies that are liabilities, that are problems. One was the unfunded liability in the trajectory, and he feels like that's been taken care of. The other was the $57 million owed to the school system, the legacy Memphis City school system. In late December, he signed off on an agreement, and I don't know who I should go to. Maybe I'll go with Bill here, just to give us the terms of the agreement that was signed off, and again, some political ramifications of that agreement, which is not totally done yet.
Sure. The bottom line is the mayor of Memphis negotiated directly with the superintendent of Shelby County Schools to settle this lawsuit, and the school board approved it. It is not the full $57 million that we've heard so much about for the last 6 years. It comes out to about $43 million when you consider cash, most of it being cash, about $30 million, and other considerations and credits between the two entities, city government and Shelby County Schools. The Shelby County Schools Board approved this on an 8-0 vote, with the chairwoman abstaining, I believe, on the same day that the settlement was announced. The council had been in favor of court-supervised mediation, which began before Thanksgiving. But this basically sidestepped that whole process, and the council's not too happy about that.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, Jackson, the council was so happy and gave a standing ovation to the mayor for getting this done.
Listen, Shay Flynn is particularly burned about this because he was directly involved in the mediation, and I couldn't pry out of him the amount that the mediation group is headed toward, but it was more than $43 million, I presume, because he is seriously miffed. I don't think it's merely the fact he's been one-upped about the mayor. And you mentioned the state comptroller. Where's this money going to come from?
That's a great question.
The state comptroller's got to have an interest in that too. $6 million is due in February, right off the bat.
Well, I think where that money is going to come from, and I think this was a big impetus for starting the talks between the mayor and Superintendent Hobson, is that the city is doing better in property tax revenue collections because the appeals are going the way of the city in most cases, to the tune of about $12.6 million extra in the city's reserve fund over what they had anticipated.
Well, like a convenient sum.
$81 million to be exact now in that reserve fund. Of course, you don't want that reserve fund to dip below, and it's been as low, I think it's about $67 million at one point.
You want to keep it at about 10% of what the total budget is. That's usually the guideline.
That's right. But what they always say about city government, at least the public says it, when they want to find money, they'll find the money.
Yeah.
And the incremental payments on this after the $6 million are completely manageable within a fiscal year. I think it's $1.2 million for the first 3 years, and it's $2.2 million annually in the years that follow that over a 12-year period.
You guys ought to be working for the administration. That's good math. But as Shay Flynn has pointed out, if this is not the case, and the mayor needs more money, he'll have to come back to the council, and the whole thing starts all over again.
Sure. This will go to the council for approval of the funding. While that's technically not the settlement itself, without the money, you don't have a settlement.
Yeah, and you mentioned the reserve fund. That was the third thing that Wharton had said is, when he talks to the bonding people, get that reserve fund up, and that's another thing that he at least is touting to get going. We'll come back to the school settlement, I think, but let's go on to Nashville and the Medicare announcement, the Medicare expansion. I'm going to turn to you, Jackson, on this. Haslam has come forward with a proposal to some degree, they don't want to call it taking advantage of Obamacare, but it is. Oh, sure. It is a Medicaid expansion that they've resisted for some years now, but it's a different sort of program.
Well, it's called Insure Tennessee. And by the way, I was thinking that this is a year-end program, and we're summing up the old year. It's like the Academy Awards. All the big movies come at the end of the year.
Just
all
like
the
that.
Big news came at the end of this year.
Yeah.
This has been brewing for 2 or 3 years, and a lot of people have been very agonized about it. All the hospitals have been very agonized about the lack of Medicaid expansion funds under the Affordable Care Act. And finally, Haslam, who's been talking about a Tennessee plan for years, came up with one. Again, Insure Tennessee. It's got 2 tracks, one of which allows for vouchers for people who want to use their employer's health insurance. Another of which works through TennCare, which supplies some modest co-pays and premiums. And it requires conformity with some good preventive care on the part of the recipient, there's a 2-year, it's called a pilot program, meaning that in 2 years, if the feds do not come through with the 90% of subsequent costs they've promised, or if the hospital association goes back from its promised support, then the program can be terminated. So we assume that those things are not going to happen. This is going to go on for a while. Everybody seems satisfied. Ron Ramsey seems open to the concept. Now, that's very key.
Yeah. Well, and the lobbying on this is pretty intense because you've got, it's an interesting thing for the Republican Party. Clearly, the supermajority that control the House, the Senate, and the governorship, they can, quote unquote, do what they want. But they've got business interests, hospitals, doctors groups, medical device company. I mean, the whole industry of medical has been pressuring them to take this money because it's free money. And yet the Tea Party wing doesn't want anything that is remotely associated with the Affordable Care Act with Obamacare.
Right. So I was at a recent panel on the University of Memphis that was dealing with this issue of what to do with not only the governor's initiative, but overall health in Tennessee. Because right now, Tennessee ranks 45th out of 50 states in terms of overall health. And they have something like $6 billion annually that they pay for various diseases and various medical care. And so you're talking about something that's unsustainable. You're talking about something where they need to make changes. And so they're looking for not only an expansion of medical care for some of these poor areas, but also behavioral changes. Now, behavioral changes, that's something that takes a long time in order for that to happen. But the idea was to come up with incentives. So not smoking, you get an incentive there. Exercising, you get an incentive there. So it's those type of things. It is something that they have to make changes. Everyone has to be on board. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's something that everybody has to do because it's unsustainable where we are right now.
It's not a Democratic or Republican issue, and that you've got people from both parties applauding so far.
Yeah.
Except that you're going to have some opposition, not just from the Tea Party. I talked to Mark Norris this week. And I mentioned the fact that Ron Ramsey seems wide open. He said, quote, more wide open than I am. So you could have some problem there. I suspect Brian Kelsey is not going to sign
Yeah,
on
but
either.
Kelsey was on the show a year ago, in the last year or so, and famously gave the book, the How to Build a Website book, or Website for Dummy book, to the Department of Health and Human Services, Catherine Sebelius. His criticism, I've heard this from other people, of any kind of program like this in the past, and I don't know his take on the current proposal, but in the past was, well, Tennessee went through the painful process of cutting people off of the 10 care rules. We don't want to do that again. If we do this, we might be able to give care for X number of years, but inevitably, was his point, I'm paraphrasing, we're going to have to cut people back because the federal government is going to cut that funding back. And that huge distrust of the federal government, particularly of anything associated with Obama, it's going to be hard for I would think, some Republicans to get over.
Well, Mark Norris said months before any of this was introduced, and we talked about this, and he said, Hasselman's looking at this, he says, but he's not serious unless he comes to us, unless we start talking in the legislature to form a plan. So obviously they're going to be lying in wait for this.
Yeah.
Not all the soldiers are going to fall in place here.
Right.
But I do think that you had a counterweight here that, as Jackson said, didn't fall along party lines. You have a lot of rural legislators who may be Republicans, probably are Republicans, but who have safety net hospitals. Those rural hospitals have already been feeling the effects of not having the Medicaid expansion.
Yeah. I mean, we've done healthcare reforms this year, a couple of them, and you think the Med has had problems in the past, or just all those issues of the city. It's nothing compared to, may not as many people, but the problems in rural Tennessee, in rural America, but rural Tennessee are huge in terms of trying to recruit doctors, keep those hospitals open, and so on and so forth. We've got one more story here. The national change of tone. You talked about this, I think, Jackson. We go into this session with a supermajority. Yet again, it's only reinforced. What do we expect from this legislature in the coming year?
Well, I think that there is something to be gained. Right after the national elections in November, you had Mitch McConnell and other high-ranking people in the Republican Party saying, now we can cooperate and make some legislation. Well, maybe so. Maybe that's true in Nashville too, because again, this may be a signal. The Medicaid expansion, so many people signed on from so many sides. The Democrats, some of them are saying, well, they should have done this earlier. We approve. Ron Ramsey says, I think this may be it.
Yeah.
You're going to have some opposition, But again, it's not partisan opposition. It's located in a wing of the Republican Party, which is probably not going to succeed. I think Haslam has learned how to put his foot down, and I think we're going to have not kumbaya, but something much closer to it than we've had.
Also, the people that we are sending there, Ramesh Akbari, who took over last year for the late Louis DeBerry. Now you're going to have Mr. Lee, the former city council person, Joseph, not Joseph Lee.
Lee Harris.
Lee Harris. Mr. Lee, call him Mr. Lee.
He likes that. Lee Harris going up there, and he's going to take over for Ophelia Ford, so anything up. In that regard.
You said it, not me.
Well, I'm just saying. I think the record spoke for itself.
Yes, Lee Harris has not even been sworn in yet, but he's already sending out things under the state Senate letterhead as Senate Minority Leader.
But
he's making policy statements.
The thing is that these are young faces and they are aggressive, and they are willing to work with people to get things done. They've shown that in their previous situation. So I think those are positives going up there.
Right. The Democratic Party, though, in the state, locally still strongish, I guess. You know, they had the mayor's seat, but let's start statewide. I mean, we were joking with Lee Harris that he's going to go up there and be, a junior senator in the really minority party.
That's it.
Why in the world would you want to go do that? I mean, I think a lot of people are happy because he's they feel he's an upgrade over Ophelia, but why be a Democrat in the state Senate right now?
Well, you got to get experience somewhere.
Well, and you can start out with a leadership position. That's okay.
Right, and that in itself is great.
In addition, you're looking, perhaps you focus on the Mid-South and the Memphis area, and what can we work together on? Where can we find common ground with lawmakers from this area? And then with that in mind, maybe find some common ground in other areas of the state. But, having the Memphis and Mid-South as kind of your foundation will help propel.
It would be nice to see the Shelby County delegation get closer.
Yeah.
Remember all this whole school stuff, it separated people, Norris and all these people from some of the other people.
The school thing,
the school thing just tore it apart. Maybe this is the time to bring it back together again.
I think so.
Let's not get carried away.
I was feeling all warm for a second.
I think the important thing to keep in mind is that the Republican majority and then the super majority, that all began basically with district lines that the Democratic majority drew. So, it's not like the Republicans had this built-in advantage. They picked races surgically, very carefully over several election cycles to build the majority, and then the supermajority followed with the
After
momentum.
redistricting, And by the way, there were 5 Democrats in Memphis this past week being vetted by local Democrats as possible chairman of the party. Now, the Republicans renominated their chairman, Chris Devaney, who beat Joe Carr. Joe Carr is the permanent dissident in the Republican ranks. But Terry Adams, who just ran for the Senate, made a promising race. Mary Mancini, an activist in Nashville. Gloria Johnson, one of the Democratic legislators who got beat. She was a Knoxville state rep. And Linda Sherrill, who ran and failed in a legislative race, and Larry Krim, who runs for everything every time. But there are 5 people who showed up all saying we've got to have a new vision. They all had plans. They all had PowerPoint presentations. And the virtue of being down to nothing is you have a rebuilding opportunity. One of these people will have an opportunity to rebuild. Just like Lee Harris will have an opportunity to be a leader right away.
But here's the one thing that I see, though. You have Democrats leaving the legislature who are becoming mayors. Andy Burke, a former Democratic legislator, is the mayor of Chattanooga. Kim McMillan is the mayor of Clarksville. There's talk about Lo Finney, who just decided not to run for re-election, who's running for mayor in Jackson.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of mayor, a prominent Democrat in Memphis is Mayor Wharton, we've talked about. There was some talk, I think, less of a dip in his popularity. Then he brought IKEA in. And who knows what's happened since.
And he settled the lawsuit.
He had a good day the other day.
Yes.
I mean, you can't get much better if you're a politician. But then, what came before? Because it was a long year for the mayor. I mean, remember, we were all there for the State of the State and his 5 Ps, and he had poverty and he had potholes, but most of all, he had pension. And that issue just hovered over him like a dark cloud all year, including the whole blue flu thing that really vilified him as the target of it all during the time he kept saying, well, I want to take, I put out the only plan that's out there. I'm open to anybody else's plan. But yet they targeted the mayor as being the boogeyman in this whole thing.
Right. But it is tough in the IKEA thing. Maybe I'll turn to you on the IKEA thing, Andrew. But when the mayor has this platform, I mean, he just does. And we feed into it in the media, but when that comes along, he does a press conference, he's got the furniture down at City Hall, people are going wild about IKEA, and the mayor gets maybe even undue credit, but as he said, he'd been working on it for 6, 7, 8 months. So he has that power that a lot of his challengers won't have, and even city council members don't have to put that big platform.
He does, and it's kind of the official start of his reelection campaign was this week. A lot of people were talking about that. The IKEA thing, it's interesting. I think if you look at the dynamic of IKEA and why they came here, I think FedEx was a huge player in that. You have no IKEA anywhere in Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama. And so here you have an opportunity to get retail space relatively cheap right by the headquarters of a huge distribution company in this area. I-40 corridor, Wolf Chase, there's a lot of great aspects to it. And I think that they spent good part of a year looking at that and looking at all the factors involved. So yeah, the mayor's certainly going to take credit. And then if you look at the last 2 weeks with the Target Distribution Center, a $400 million investment there, it has been a couple of good weeks.
Yeah.
These are traditional advantages that any mayoral incumbent has in our city. And does the mayor deserve to get credit for economic development announcements like this? Perhaps not the whole enchilada, but the mayor also takes the barbs for the incentives that come along with them as well.
Absolutely.
The mayor has to answer questions about the unemployment rate if it spikes as well. So it's kind of part of the of the job, but the incumbent always has these advantages.
And look at his predecessor. I mean, his predecessor, there's been a lot of criticism over the time that his predecessor was in office and maybe just on cruise control and not going out and actively searching these companies that want to
I don't think anyone would say that Wharton's on cruise control at this point. They might criticize. I mean, there's a pilot, the tax incentive associated with IKEA, the Target one, Cummins. I mean, just in the last few weeks, these big projects involve what critics call these tax giveaways. And it bugs the mayor to no end when people call it that. But that's what people, even this, we talked about the pension vote, we talked about school settlement. I mean, people talk about these big projects. Yeah, they're a bunch of jobs, but it's hurting the tax base, and that they're trying to use that against the mayor.
And the timing of this for the mayor's is so perfect. Now, Jim Strickland some time back said anybody who wants to challenge the mayor has to decide by the end of the year. We're talking about the Academy Awards, the end of the year, these big stories, end of the year. Everything is working for the mayor at the end of the year. So I think a lot of people have been talking about it, including Strickland, will have second thoughts.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so Strickland's a possible candidate.
He's
Harold
possible, Harold Collins.
Harold
But
Collins.
see, none of these people, when I'm out in the field, they don't excite the voters.
Right.
And so what we might indeed have again is another 20% total turnout. And of course, Wharton may get 50% of 20%.
I think he will have a serious challenge, more serious certainly than he had in 2011. But I think some decisions have to be made. I think one council member, in order for this to be a tight race, has to challenge him. I don't think you can have 2 or 3 of them. So some of that has to be worked out on this. But I think he's vulnerable. But like I said, I think he also has the incumbent's advantage. And he has a calendar that already has some dates on it. He has a projected May opening for Bass Pro Shops. He has other things in the pipeline that we're going to hear about probably after the new year gets started, right about now, as a matter of fact, as people are watching this.
Yeah. Just a couple minutes left. We do this every year. We do some predictions. I want to go first because I want to predict, as I have. I'm going to claim this one, as I have for, I think, every year we've done the show. We're going into, I think, our 5th year now, maybe. Bass Pro will open in 2015. I'm going to say it.
Not necessarily in May, though.
I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it by 2015.
Will it open in sections?
The door will be open.
There you go.
The door will be open.
Can I go next?
Yeah, please.
I predict that the Memphis Grizzlies will be playing in the NBA Finals this year.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's as we tape this, it's been a pretty amazing run.
It really has been.
And an amazing run in a way they've captured the city. I mean, I think the Memphis Flyer poll, it came out that they topped the Tigers. That was before the Tiger season started.
Right.
And now it's just getting really bad. Your poor son, bless, is just got the what sounded like a great gig.
We don't talk a lot this year so far.
The Memphis Grizzlies. You took the words right out of my
That's why I had to go
mouth,
next.
I think. Yeah, I know. I mean, it is very impressive what they're doing, and I think we were talking earlier off camera was that the fact that since the Tigers are down, you are building perhaps a base that has never been so wide and vast and broad in this community.
Other predictions. We got about a minute left here.
Bill has convinced me. Predict A.C. Wharton returns again for another term. See, my excitement.
He said he would have a serious challenge.
I think that in 2015, you will see minority business expansion become a major political issue, and you will see a lot of discussion about not programs, not red tape, but about actual results and increasing the amount of business that minority-owned firms do in the city of Memphis.
We had
not public sector alone, but private sector as well, and moving the needle on that.
All right. Any other prediction? We've got 30 seconds left. Anyone else want to go out on a limb here?
What about Coach Passner?
Does he make it?
He
10,
is
15 seconds.
on the fence, I would say.
$2.6 million a year he stays.
Yeah.
Big
The only
contract.
issue is the administration takes a tougher stand in terms of hiring his assistants.
Okay. There we go. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.